All right, everyone, let's go to get started. Hope y'all are doing well. Week 3. Just some announcements before we get started. ECTF, we had the intro workshop yesterday. If you did not catch that, make sure to DM one of the ECTF's leads, or you can just ask in the Discord and we'll get you added to that. But next week, they will be holding a workshop on basic cryptography. So if you're interested in participating in our ECTF team, just make sure to attend most or as many of the workshops as you can so you can be ready for the competition come winter. This Friday, we will be having a Bobo social, so come pull up, just meet at the Bruin Bear at 6:30 p.m. and we'll all go walk down to Westwood together. If you are in a Cyber Pals group, definitely try and find your officer that's in your group and just chat on the way there as well as at Bobo. And then next week, Katie will be giving a talk on esolangs or esoteric langs in this room. If you're interested in volunteering for LACTF, so this is for event planning, finance management, infrastructure management, writing challenges, no experience is required for any of those categories. We'll have some basic introductions and workshops to help onboard you. If you're interested, please make sure to apply by this Friday, and we have regular organizer meetings on Sundays from 5 to 6 p.m. And then next Monday, we will have a talk by Arnav on some cool Minecraft RNG manipulation. If you want to learn how to become a god of a Minecraft world. So, okay, so I guess I haven't talked about this here. So as part of ACM Cyber, we have an active membership system where as long as you just come here and regularly attend meetings and participate in CyberLab, which is what you're here for right now, you can become an active member, which means you post that you're part of the club on our website. You gain access to extra channels. You gain access to our research program in the summer, if that is something you're interested in. Just make sure to fill out, this is the start of quarter interest form, just so we have you in the system where you're here at CyberLab, you're interested in CyberLab, and you showed up. And yeah, CyberLab is just one way to become an active member. You can also do it through attending Cyber Academies, which are Monday, or if you would like to do Cybeta Row, which our next CTF will not be this weekend, but the weekend after. Cool. With that, I guess I'll go into my talk about careers in cybersecurity. So before we get started, just curious, how many people attended the Verkada event last week? Okay, good number of you. So I guess another couple notes before I get started is cybersecurity is a pretty large field, right? It's about securing stuff, and stuff can be literally anything you can think of. So almost every field of computer science can and will have some security aspect. So I'm just going to try and do a surface level overview of where I want to say a lot of the jobs are in cybersecurity. And also cybersecurity is kind of a new field. So job titles are fairly fluid. What one company might call security engineering, another company would call something completely different. So always check your job titles whenever you're applying for more details about what exactly that job posting is about to do. So yeah, why does cybersecurity exist? Does anyone want to just jump in and guess? Why do we care about cybersecurity? Sure. Yeah. So you don't get hacked. Yes, pretty much exactly. When you say, yep. And one way we also put it is we say you don't want to get hacked because you don't want your data stolen. We want to make sure the data is confidential. We want to make sure it's not changed, so it keeps its integrity. And we want to make sure we can access it when we're supposed to access it. So I'll change it a little bit. Why do companies care about cybersecurity? Why don't companies want to get hacked? There's no wrong answers. There's a lot of reasons. Yeah. Yeah, leaking their client's information, right? If their client information gets leaked, I'm sure their clients are going to get really angry at them, right? So reputational damage. Yeah.
They know it was $1 billion.
Yeah. Lying, cheating. There's also regulations now that are starting to go into effect where it's California, for example, says if you leak information of people's stuff, you have to pay some amount per person's information leaked, which is not great for a company. Yeah. Yeah, very good. This is more corporate espionage or against this. So a lot of companies are only worth as much as they are because they have all this confidential trade secrets. And if that gets leaked, they lose their advantage in the market. Yeah, so kind of there. I kind of just labeled 3 here that you can kind of roughly group it into. Legal regulatory requirements, which also can then lead into financial damage as well as reputational damage, which nowadays might seem a little weird because every company seems to get breached nowadays. But when you're talking about business to business transactions, especially, that's when the companies start to actually really care about like security reputation a lot more and in a lot more power than like us as individuals have. So what are the motivations for companies to hire people to work in cybersecurity? Well, there's kind of three broad categories I'm going to group it into. One is to protect their own assets. The two is to provide cybersecurity as a service. And the third one I'm just going to group into like government research. So protecting our own assets. How do you do that? How do you protect your own stuff? First way, to detect and respond to attackers, right? Somebody is trying to get into your system or your application right now. You need to detect it, respond to it, and block them, right? Maybe they were unsuccessful, maybe they're successful, and you have to kick them out of your system. So that's where security operations comes into play. So this has, you'll often hear something called a SOC or a security operations center. This is like your 24/7, like cool hacker fancy dashboard place with a bunch of screens showing a bunch of information that they don't actually use, by the way. It's all for show. Where they're like responding to attacks as they happen. So you have things like security analysts who will look at the logs that are coming in and make sure that if there's any suspicious behavior, they respond to it. You have incident responders, which is like a tier up where once some anomaly has been detected, you need to respond to it and figure out why that anomaly happened and resolve the incident. You also have things like threat hunting, where you proactively go and try and find like adversaries in your network. So you might hear like, oh, so-and-so's company got breached with this malware. Let's go see if we have this malware installed on some of our systems, for example. You have forensics analysts, so post exploitation, like you've kicked them out of your network, or maybe you haven't yet. Try to figure out how they got into your network. That's all about forensics. And then threat intelligence is like trying to see what the general landscape of threat actors or hackers are out there in the world. And maybe if your company's name starts showing up on some darknet website about, oh, these are like companies we want to hack or have hacked, you would probably want to know about it. By the way, if anybody ever has any questions or likes me to go into like more detail, just feel free to raise your hand. All right, so we talked about detecting and responding to attackers. Well, second part is you need to build your applications themselves to be secure, right? It would not be great if, I don't know, your product that you deliver to everyone just lets anyone use their product and just gain access to all the information. That would be not great. So there's also an aspect that I'd kind of consider security architecture. So this is building and maintaining secure systems. And there's a lot that goes into this, right? Your entire stack of what you would consider a big tech or just like technology company, all of those roles play a part in here. In terms of like security specifically, you have people who might specialize in building systems to be secure, like security engineering. You have your access control systems. You have all of your IT management to make sure that, safeguards that are in place are active and functioning. And even just like your software developers have to make sure that they're coding their stuff to be secure. Okay, you've built your applications to be secure. Well, how do you know that they're secure? Well, we also need to check that they're secure. And that's where you get application security. These are jobs where the goal is, here is my application, here's a website, here's an application I made, here's a server, and you basically audit it for vulnerabilities. So this is often, you often see like application security engineering, AppSec. So you might see just security engineering, security auditing. Those all kind of mean the same, roughly the same thing. And it's just going into that application, checking for vulnerabilities. You also have a couple side ones. One's called DevSecOps. Has anybody heard of like DevOps before? Yeah, has anybody heard of DevSecOps before? Okay, you can kind of, it's very roughly speaking, it is DevOps, which is making the developer experience like very smooth running for them to develop their applications and making sure that from the start to the finish, they're developing using secure systems, they're developing their code securely, etc. And last, we have bug bounty. There are some people who go out there and they just find some companies that are like, hey, we'll pay you money to hack our site. And if you disclose it properly, we'll pay you out. So there are some people who actually make a living off of bug bounty, though that is generally pretty hard to get enough to sustain themselves. Okay, so you've ensured your application is secure. Well, your application does not live in a void by itself. You also need to make sure that the entire system around that application is secure, right? If I have my front-end website that's running on some cloud server somewhere, not only do I need to make sure that's secure, I need to make sure the server itself is secure. I need to make sure someone can't like bypass my security and go through some random I don't know, backend service I left exposed. I need to make sure if somebody's like just physically picked up stole a laptop from an employee and like tries to hack in, they can't just like compromise everything without even knowing like somebody's credentials. So that's where red teaming comes in. So you can think of the previous one, application security, as focusing on a single application at a time. Red team, you focus on the entire system. So you might focus on the entire corporate network or the entire like system of development from start to finish. And this is where you focus on things like technological, human, and physical defenses. So there are some red team jobs where you might physically go to their place and try and like work your way into the building, or you might like start sending some phishing emails to see if people will bite. You then go and hack, and then you might just sit there for like a month and see if your blue team or your security operations center notices. So this can be a really fun job. And again, this focuses on the overall security of everything. Cool. And then lastly, right, you've made sure everything's secure, but ultimately, don't forget the legal aspect. Companies are also interested in making sure they're following the laws and regulations, especially in things like finance or healthcare, where they could get hit with like a lot of fines, as well as a lot of companies have their own internal policies that they need to make sure they're following. Like might have a CISO or chief information security officer say, this is the standard of security we should have across the organization. Well, you need someone to enforce that. So that's where you get to government risk and compliance job. And there's a lot here, so I'm not going to go over all of them, but you can think of this as the business side of cybersecurity. So assessing the risk, assessing all of your applications in your company, right? There's this term that we have called shadow IT, where your software developer is like, oh, I need this application running so I can develop it. So now all of a sudden you have some server running on your network that you're not aware of that's probably not being patched and probably has a vulnerability in it. So you need to find those applications and make sure that they're not running or at least patched. User education, somebody has to create those phishing emails, somebody has to create those like trainings, consulting, risk analyst, compliance analyst, et cetera, et cetera. The line goes on, the list goes on. All right, are there any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of time for the-
It depends at the company, right? Smaller companies might literally have two people that handle all of the security, or maybe even two people that handle like all of the IT, and then they have to think about security. But once you start getting to larger companies, then yeah, pretty much all of these roles kind of become dedicated. So definitely not necessarily like across the 5 categories I just mentioned, probably not across those. Within it, you might have somebody who does like a bunch of these like what we call GRC roles all in one, or it might be separated. Just depends on the size of the company. But almost all big companies will have all of these just as completely separate roles. Yeah. Cool. All right. So now a company's protected themselves. Let's talk about companies that or jobs that exist to protect other companies. I'm just going to put an asterisk that in large companies like big tech, so like Google, Meta, Amazon, etc., others can also be like an internal customer, such that like you might have a security team over here that kind of then covers security of all these other product teams over here. So while they're not technically a different company, they kind of function as one in terms of communication and just being a separate entity. So how do you protect them? Well, first thing, you could build your own security monitoring system. So that's where you get a lot of companies like CrowdStrike, Microsoft Defender, Palo Alto Networks, Splunk. You also have like some security scanning tools like Nessus, and all of these need a lot of people to actually develop and maintain them, right? So that's where you get into like security software engineering, and all of the fun stuff that comes along it, like infrastructure management, reliability engineering, IT, sales, marketing, all of that fun stuff. So to develop the security products, and they're both like cloud and self-hosted versions. Um, and then you also have groups that audit codes of others. So maybe you might not be building your own entire application that you're then selling to other people, but you might be auditing code. So earlier when I was talking about like application security, so looking for vulnerabilities or talking about red team jobs, well, you can also hire companies that'll do this for you. So a couple examples would be Trail of Bits and OtterSec. And companies will just hire them, say, hey, I'm paying you $50,000, do a 2-week engagement and see if you can find any vulnerabilities in my application. So there are a lot of jobs at smaller, what we call auditing firms that exist to do this kind of work, essentially. Cool. And then lastly, let's talk about government research. So there's kind of two things here. The first one, secure their own country, right? A government wants to make sure other countries can't hack them. So this can be finding vulnerabilities in their own government systems and fixing them. Or this can be things like standardizing security recommendations. So if you ever heard of like MITRE frameworks, for example, that's semi-government related to make sure that we have a standard across all of the government and related industry partners to be secure and not like easily hackable. And lastly, and then we also have some organizations, for example, CISA, that deals with information sharing to make sure that if there's a security breach, companies or government agencies can get the help they need in order to fix or resolve the issue. Because ultimately, businesses getting hacked is a government problem and that disrupts the economy. So the government has a vested interest in making sure that everybody is secure. And then logically, right, we secured our country. Well, let's go hack other countries. So they also want to find vulnerabilities to use against other countries. And this is where we get into a field that's called vulnerability research, where your goal is to essentially find exploitable 0 days, so previously unknown vulnerabilities in common software. So these can be things like Microsoft Word, Acrobat for like PDF sending, try and find vulnerabilities in like iOS and Android. Like vulnerability research is the type of job that will find those vulnerabilities that you might hear about on the news saying, oh, there's a new iOS exploit that was used against journalists. That's a vulnerability researcher's job to find those exploits. Governments will often they will often triage them and decide, do we want to keep them secret and exploit them against others? There's a big one a while ago in like 2016, I believe, where the NSA found an exploit called Eternal Blue that was then it was then leaked to the public. So Microsoft then fixed it. But then a couple months later, if you ever heard of the WannaCry virus, WannaCry exploited the Eternal Blue virus or Eternal Blue vulnerability to then spread super rapidly. And there are also some non-government organizations that also do vulnerability research. If you've ever heard of Google Project Zero, they do a lot of really cool vulnerability research in order to secure systems just publicly. And what they do is they don't hide it. They just inform the vendor and give them usually 90 days to fix it before they tell the public that this vulnerability was found. I'm not going to name any companies here just because they can be some companies who do vulnerability research don't like to advertise that they do it. Some do. So this can sometimes be a little hard to find the jobs, but they do exist. Cool. Are there any questions so far? I know I was doing a lot of talking, but all right. So just a couple final remarks. So salaries in cybersecurity. So they generally tend to be, or just like some kind of trends that you might find. Big tech generally tends to pay cybersecurity roles similar to SWE. Like Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple all pay basically in the same pay brackets that they use for SWE. Google notably put down levels you one level, which is annoying, which is unfortunate, but that is the case. There's also like less specialized work that exists that are like lower pay on average, right? Cybersecurity originally came from what we call infosecurity, which is kind of a branch of information technology. So some of the jobs that are closer to what we would call an IT job with security attached to it generally gets to pay less than like you might see a SWE. So this is like security analyst or SOC work, access control, vulnerability management, just because they generally don't require as much knowledge. And then you also have a lot of small companies. So this is things maybe not necessarily small, but the ones who focus in cybersecurity. So like CrowdStrike, for example, or the smaller like specialized firms that do security auditing, they generally trend lower than big tech, but it can be highly variable. There are some that pay like way more than big tech because they find the best people maybe in the world for security auditing and put them on these like very high paying jobs so they can pay their workers very well. Cybersecurity classes at UCLA. So we currently have roughly 3 classes here. So right now in the fall, Professor Tien is teaching her computer system security class. How many of you are in that class right now? I'm just curious. All right, a couple of you, yeah. She runs it every year, so if you didn't take it this year, don't worry. It'll be run next year. And she covers like a large variety of different topics, including some stuff we cover here in ACM Cyber and Cyber Academy. In winter, Professor Notter usually runs his hardware security course where you learn more about hardware security and you go into more cool like side channel attacks, sensor security, hardware security. And it is a grad class, but you can just enroll directly or you might need to petition to take it, but you can count it as like a CS or EC elective or SciTech class. And lastly, there's also Computer Science 136. Yeah. Yeah, I took all three. Or I'm currently in the first one. I've taken these two. Do you have any questions about it? Yes, right now. Yeah. Wait, no, I've been to the first few lectures. I just got busy this week.
The grad class, like, does he actually like teach it well, or like?
Press like Nodder?
I personally think
Yeah,
so.
I think Nodder's class is great. Do you have like bad experiences with grad courses or?
Bias, because like you guys already have a lot of like experience in cybersecurity, so when you go into these classes, it's like, oh, it's just a review of the stuff I know. So it's like, from the standpoint of someone who's like kind of bad at cybersecurity, like, is the class?
I mean, I'll say like from someone who is biased in the sense that I like cybersecurity, I do think like Nagar's class is just a very basic intro. Like he goes over like a lot of breadth of content, but not too far into depth. So he introduces you to a lot of different things basically in the class without going too deep into it. So like I personally think you should go deeper, but obviously you probably would think the opposite. So I think it's a pretty good class for beginners.
Yeah, I would say Nodder's class is definitely, I would say he focuses more on concepts rather than like strict hands-on stuff. So he'll talk about like more high-level concepts, which might be a little more approachable than like what Professor Tien does in her class, which I do realize can be a little bit confusing for people. And then lastly, there's also Computer Science 136. It's not offered this year as far as I'm aware, but would not recommend taking it just due to the content being kind of outdated. Basically, if you're interested in cybersecurity, you're going to want a good summary of like a lot of different things in computer science, like how do computers work? How do you build systems? How do you build applications? How do you encrypt stuff? How do networks work? So all of these classes and more will be applicable. And yeah, I'll post these slides in the Discord later if you'd like to reference them. And then lastly, like, where can I get hired? So this is just a list of companies that people at ACM Cyber have been or currently are employed at for like internships or new grads for security specifically. So you have like a big tech, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Meta. You have the cybersecurity specific companies like CrowdStrike, Juniper Networks. You have some generic companies that do like software with some security. So like SpaceX and Verkada. We have some security auditing companies like OtterSec and Trail of Bits who have to take interns, as well as your defense contractors like Aerospace and Sandia who have security positions that we've had people at ACM Cyber here do. Cool. So yeah, then obviously there are a lot more companies you could apply and work at. These are just the ones that people in the club have worked at before. So yeah, are there any questions? Cool. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to like DM me in the chat, send it in like Discord, or you can always ask like your Cyber Pals mentor if you have any questions. All right, so let's dive into the lab. So just quick recap of which labs they are. If you'd like, just pick whichever lab you feel whichever lab interests you the most. This doesn't have to necessarily match up with whatever you put on the membership form. That's okay, just go to whichever lab you want. So just quickly, malware lab, you'll learn how malware infects computers and you'll build like your own toy malware that you can almost like a malware tool to then infect like a vulnerable machine that we've provided for you. Fuzzing lab is it will learn how to do the basics of fuzzing. So this is a technique where you blast a program, which is like lots of randomized inputs. And this is actually how some vulnerability research people find vulnerabilities is they like build a fuzzer and run it against some program. And this is great at finding lots of these little edge cases automatically. It's really cool. Would also recommend. And this is like more low-level programming. So you'll be looking at things like C-level code. And lastly, ad block lab. So if you're interested in making a Chrome extension that kind of acts as a ad blocker, ad block lab will be making a toy ad blocker. Cool. All right. So just quick poll. Who's interested in doing malware lab? Okay. Who's interested in doing ad block lab? Cool. And then who's interested in doing fuzzing lab? All right, cool. So my arrangement will work. So malware lab, let's move to the front of the room, just like in front of the TVs. Ad block lab, move behind the screens because that's the screen we'll be using. And then fuzzing lab, just like meet right outside the door here, and we'll go walk over to the room that we'll be doing just down the hall. Thank you.